Money has a way of revealing who people really are. I learned this the hard way when my husband Mark slapped a red envelope on our kitchen counter and told me to withdraw $1,000 by tomorrow morning. "It's for the company gala," he said, adjusting his silk tie with manicured fingers. "I need you looking the part. I'm Jenna," and until that moment, I thought I knew what kind of marriage I had. 15 years of compromise and sacrifice had taught me to read between the lines, but this was different. This wasn't about appearance, it was about control. "Mark, that's almost everything in our joint account." My hands gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles white against the granite. "What about the mortgage payment?" He laughed, that hollow sound I'd grown to dread. "Always so dramatic, Jen. You think I haven't planned for that?" His phone buzzed and his eyes flickered to the screen. A slight smile crossed his face before he quickly turned it face down. "I can wear the black dress from last year's event. No one will notice. Everyone notices everything." He stepped closer, cologne overwhelming the lingering scent of my morning coffee. "Lucas just made me lead agent on the Riverside development. Do you have any idea what that means for us?" Us. The word hung between us like a bad joke. "I need you to be perfect tomorrow night. Perfect dress, perfect smile, perfect wife." His fingers traced my jawline, a gesture that once made me weak in the knees, but now sent ice through my veins. "Can you do that for me?" I nodded, because that's what I always did. 15 years of nodding had become a habit harder to break than any addiction. "Good girl." He grabbed his briefcase, already moving toward the door. "Oh, and make sure you get your hair done. Emma recommended that new place downtown, Lux, I think. Put it on the credit card." Emma. His assistant's name dropped like poison in my coffee. 28, ambitious, and everything I used to be before I became Mark Thompson's wife. The door closed behind him, and I stood alone in our designer kitchen, staring at that red envelope. Inside was a withdrawal slip, already filled out in his precise handwriting. All it needed was my signature. I called Claire, my best friend since college, now a successful lawyer, who'd been telling me for months what I refused to see. "He wants me to empty our account," I said when she answered. "For a dress. Jesus, Jenna." Her voice carried the weight of unspoken warnings. "Tell him to go to hell." "It's not that simple." "It never is with Mark." Papers shuffled in the background. "Remember when he borrowed from your inheritance for that investment scheme? How did that work out?" The memory stung. $40,000 of my father's hard-earned money, gone in a flash of Mark's signature. "I can't just..." "Can't what? Stand up for yourself. He's bleeding you dry and you're letting him." My phone buzzed with a text. "Mark, Emma's booking your appointment at Lux for 2 p.m. Don't be late." Something snapped inside me, quiet but definitive, like a thread pulled too tight for too long. "Claire," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I need your help with something. Name it. I need to know my options, all of them, and I need to know how to make sure I don't lose everything when I use them." The silence on the other end lasted 3 heartbeats. "Come to my office. Now." Her tone had shifted from friend to lawyer. "Bring any financial documents you can get your hands on." I looked at the red envelope again, at Mark's perfect handwriting, demanding my compliance. Then I opened our home office drawer and reached for the stack of bank statements I'd been pretending not to see for months. It was time to stop nodding. Claire's office felt like a confessional, all mahogany and leather, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across her desk. I spread out 15 years of bank statements between us, like tarot cards telling a future I should have seen coming. "Look at these transfers," Claire said, tapping her pen against a highlighted column. 5,000 here, 8,000 there, all to an account labeled Investment Holdings. Mark said it was for property developments. The words tasted stale, excuses I'd swallowed for too long. "And this one?" She pointed to a recent transaction, 15,000 to marketing consultancy services. My stomach clenched. That was supposed to be for the Riverside project's promotional campaign. Claire's expression hardened. "Jenna, I ran a check. That company doesn't exist." The pen between my fingers snapped, blue ink staining my skin like a bruise. What? It's a shell account. Opened 6 months ago. She slid a printout across the desk. The signatory is Emma Brooks. The room tilted sideways. I remembered Emma at last year's Christmas party, her hand lingering too long on Mark's arm, the way they both laughed at some private joke. I'd dismissed it then, told myself I was being paranoid. There's more, Claire continued, her voice gentle but firm. The withdrawal started around the same time Emma became his assistant. My phone buzzed. Another text from Mark. Appointment confirmed at Lux. Don't forget to pick up my dry cleaning after. I can't believe I've been so blind. I pressed my palms against my eyes until stars appeared. You weren't blind, Jenna. You were trusting. There's a difference. Claire leaned forward. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Before I could answer, her office door opened. A familiar figure filled the doorway, and my heart stopped. Dad, Henry Collins stepped into the room, his weathered face creased with concern. Claire called me. I hope you don't mind, Claire said. We need someone else in your corner. Dad sat beside me, his presence solid and reassuring, like it had been since I was little. Show me, he said simply. As Claire explained the financial maze Mark had created, I watched my father's expression darken. He'd never fully trusted Mark, especially after the inheritance incident. Now I understood why. Remember what you told me when you started teaching? I asked him suddenly. He raised an eyebrow. You said sometimes the best lessons come from our biggest mistakes. I gathered the bank statements, arranging them chronologically. Well, I've made a hell of a mistake, and I'm ready to learn from it. What's your plan? Claire asked. First, I'm going to that hair appointment. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. Then I'm going to be the perfect wife at tomorrow's gala, just like Mark wants. Jenna, Dad started, but I cut him off. Because while I'm being perfect, I'm going to start documenting everything. Every transaction, every lie, every time he's been with Emma instead of at a client meeting. My voice was steady now, fueled by a clarity I hadn't felt in years. And when I have enough evidence, I'm going to take him apart piece by piece, just like he did to our marriage. Claire exchanged glances with my father. That could take time. Good. I picked up my purse, feeling the weight of the red envelope inside. Time is exactly what I need. Mark thinks he's the only one who can play the long game. He's wrong. Dad stood, pulling me into a hug that smelled of his old leather jacket and pipe tobacco. You're not alone in this, sweetheart. I know. I stepped back, wiping my eyes. But I need to do this my way. Mark's careful, methodical. To beat him, I need to be better. And the gala tomorrow? Claire asked. I smiled, thinking of the designer boutique downtown where Emma always shopped. I think it's time I met Mark's new assistant properly, don't you? After all, we seem to have so much in common. As I left Claire's office, my phone buzzed one final time. Mark again. Don't forget, perfect wife tomorrow night. I typed back, don't worry, honey. I'll be everything you deserve. The gala sparkled with fake smiles and designer dresses, a perfect stage for perfect lies. I stood at the edge of the ballroom, watching Mark work the crowd. He was in his element, one hand gesturing with practiced enthusiasm as he described the riverside development to Lucas Reed. The other hand rested on Emma's lower back. Mrs. Thompson? A waiter appeared with champagne. Your husband asked me to bring you this. I accepted the glass, noting how Emma's eyes followed the waiter's movement. She whispered something to Mark, who nodded without looking at me. Their synchronized indifference made my skin crawl. My new dress, bought with that $1,000, felt like armor. I'd chosen emerald green, Emma's signature color, watching her face tighten when I'd walked in. Small victories. Jenna? Lucas broke away from the group, approaching with his characteristic warmth. The Riverside presentation was brilliant. Mark tells me you helped with the financial planning. Behind him, Mark's smile flickered. We both knew I hadn't seen a single document related to Riverside. Actually, I said, matching Mark's practiced tone. Emma handled all that. Didn't you, Emma? She startled, wine sloshing in her glass. I just assisted with the basics. Don't be modest. I stepped closer, noting how Mark's jaw clenched. Those marketing consultancy fees must have required quite a bit of coordination. Emma's face drained of colour. Lucas looked between us, confusion creasing his brow. Marketing fees? He asked. Darling, Mark cut in, his fingers digging into my arm. You must be thinking of something else. Let's get some air. I pulled away, the champagne in my glass trembling. No, I'm quite certain. $15,000 last month alone. Quite an investment in promotional materials. The room seemed to still. Lucas turned to Mark, his expression hardening. We haven't authorized any marketing expenditure for Riverside yet. It's a misunderstanding, Mark said smoothly, but sweat beaded at his temples. Jenna's been under a lot of stress lately. Have I? I pulled out my phone, fingers hovering over the banking app. Should we review the transactions together? Emma suddenly excused herself, practically running toward the ladies' room. Mark's perfect mask cracked just enough for me to see the panic underneath. Lucas, he said, let me explain. In my office, Monday morning. Lucas's tone left no room for argument. He nodded to me, something like respect in his eyes, before walking away. Mark grabbed my arm again, harder this time, steering me toward a quiet corner. What the hell do you think you're doing? Playing the perfect wife, I said, removing his fingers one by one from my arm. Isn't that what you wanted? You have no idea what you've just done. His voice shook with barely contained rage. That money was what, Mark? Payment for services rendered? I watched Emma return, makeup freshly applied over tears. Does she know about the Shell account? Or did you tell her those transfers were legitimate too? The colour drained from his face. How did you... Find out. Maybe I learned from the best. I finished my champagne, setting the glass on a passing tray. You taught me so much about appearances, after all. I'll destroy you, he hissed, all pretense gone. Everything we have is in my name. You'll have nothing. I laughed, the sound sharp enough to make nearby guests turn. No, Mark, you already took everything. Now I'm taking it back. His phone buzzed. Emma, standing across the room, looking lost. Mark glanced at the screen, then at me, realization dawning in his eyes. You planned this, he said. The dress, the timing, all of it. Consider it my contribution to the Riverside project. I straightened his tie, just as he'd done yesterday morning. I'm sure Lucas will have questions about those marketing fees on Monday. Better get your story straight. I turned to leave, but he caught my wrist. This isn't over. You're right. I pulled free, feeling stronger with each step away from him. It's just beginning. As I walked through the ballroom, heads turned. They'd seen enough, heard enough. Tomorrow the whispers would start. By Monday, Mark's carefully constructed world would begin to crumble. My phone buzzed with a text from Claire. Did it work? I looked back at Mark, standing alone now, his perfect world fracturing around him. Emma had disappeared, probably realizing she'd backed the wrong horse. Better than we planned, I replied. He never saw it coming, just like I hadn't. All those years ago, when he'd first started taking everything from me, piece by piece. Mark didn't come home after the gala. 3 days of silence stretched between us like a minefield, broken only by the buzz of my phone as Claire's updates rolled in. The latest one made my coffee go cold. Emma cleaned out her desk this morning, security escort. I was organizing patient files at the nurse's station when a shadow fell across my desk. Lucas Reed stood there, looking as out of place in the hospital hallway as I had felt at his gala. Mrs. Thompson. His voice was low, careful. Do you have a moment? We found an empty consultation room. Lucas didn't sit, just stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back. The audit team found irregularities going back 18 months, he said, not just in Riverside, every major project Mark touched. My hands twisted in my lap. I see. No, I don't think you do. He turned, fixing me with a steady gaze. There's nearly $500,000 unaccounted for. The board wants criminal charges. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, matching the pitch of my rising panic. This was bigger than I'd imagined, deeper than Emma, more dangerous than revenge. Mark called in sick today, Lucas continued. Would you happen to know where he is? I thought of our empty house, of Mark's missing passport. No. Interesting. Lucas placed a business card on the table between us. Because someone transferred everything from your joint accounts this morning. All of it. The room tilted sideways. I grabbed the edge of the table, feeling the smooth wood under my fingers, trying to stay grounded. When? My voice sounded far away. 6 a.m., right after Emma booked 2 tickets to Belize. He paused. Non-refundable. A laugh bubbled up, bitter as burnt coffee. Of course, while I'd been planning my small revenge, Mark had been orchestrating his escape, with her. The police will want to talk to you, Lucas said gently. As his wife, they'll assume you knew. But I didn't. The words came out sharp, defensive. No? He raised an eyebrow. You seemed pretty well informed about those marketing fees at the gala. The trap snapped shut. In trying to expose Mark's affair, I'd implicated myself in his fraud. My fingerprints were all over those bank statements, my signature on joint accounts that had funded his schemes. My pager buzzed. Emergency in Ward 3. Real life calling through the chaos. I have to go. I stood, professional mask sliding back into place. My patients need me. They'll come for you first, Lucas said as I reached the door. When they can't find him, you'll be their easiest target. I thought of the red envelope, still sitting on my kitchen counter. The withdrawal slip with my signature, proof of my compliance. Every nod, every silence, every time I'd looked the other way, they all led to this moment. Then let them come. I straightened my scrubs. I've got nothing left to lose. Lucas's card burned in my pocket as I walked back to the nurse's station. 3 messages waited on my phone. Claire, call me, now. Dad, coming to get you. Pack a bag. And Mark, finally breaking his silence. You started this game, Jen. I'm just better at playing it. A young resident rushed past, clutching trauma reports. Another life hanging in the balance, another crisis to manage. I'd spent 15 years helping people survive their worst days. Maybe it was time to survive my own. I dialed Claire's number, watching the hospital corridors fill with the usual controlled chaos of afternoon rounds. They froze all the accounts, she answered without greeting. But I found something. Remember that investment account from your inheritance? The one Mark lost? What about it? It never existed. He opened a separate account in your name, used your social security number. The money's still there, hidden under layers of shell companies. Hope flickered, dangerous as a match near gasoline. Can we prove it? Better. I could hear her smile through the phone. We can take it back, but we have to move fast. My pager buzzed again. Through the window, I saw my father's truck pull into the hospital parking lot. How fast? Now, Jenna, we move now. I looked down at my scrubs, at the hospital ID that declared me Jenna Thompson, RN. Mark's perfect wife, about to become his perfect scapegoat, not anymore. I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said, already walking toward the exit. And Claire, bring everything you have. It's time to start playing by my rules. The laptop screen cast a blue glow across Claire's desk as we traced Mark's digital footprints. Each new document felt like another nail in a coffin I'd helped build. Look at this, Claire said, turning the screen. He used your nursing license number to open credit lines in 3 different states. My father paced behind us, his reflection ghosting across the window. Identity theft, that's federal. It gets worse. Claire pulled up another file. Remember that patient who left you money in their will last year? My throat tightened. Mrs. Henderson? Mark intercepted the attorney's letters, forged your signature on the documents. She slid a paper across the desk. He redirected the inheritance to one of his shell companies. The room spun. Mrs. Henderson had been my patient for 2 years, a kind woman who'd lost her battle with cancer. She'd left me $50,000 as thanks for my care during her final months. I'd thought the attorney had made a mistake when nothing came through. That money was meant for nursing school, I whispered, for my master's degree. Dad's pacing stopped. The degree he said you couldn't afford. My phone buzzed. Emma's name flashed on the screen, the first contact since she'd disappeared with Mark. Put it on speaker, Claire said, already reaching for her recorder. I answered. Emma? He left me. Her voice cracked. At the airport, took everything and left me with security breathing down my neck. Claire's fingers flew across her keyboard, documenting every word. Where are you? I asked. Some motel in Mexico. I've got nothing left, Jenna. He promised we'd start over together, but... She broke off, sobbing. The police think I knew about the fraud. They're calling it conspiracy. Dad and Claire exchanged looks. This could be a trap. Why are you calling me? Because I found something in his laptop before he took it. Files about you, about everyone he's stolen from. Names, accounts, everything. She paused. I'll trade you. The files for immunity. My laugh sounded hollow. I can't promise you immunity, Emma. I'm probably going to jail myself. No, you're not. Her voice hardened. These files prove he set you up years ago. Every transaction, every forgery. He planned it all. Made you look complicit while he built his escape route. The pieces clicked together. The red envelope, the joint accounts, the constant demands for signatures on documents I never got to read. Where can we meet? I asked. Jenna, Dad warned. But Claire held up a hand, mouthing, Wait. I'm coming back tomorrow, Emma said. Meeting Lucas at noon. He promised to help if I cooperate. Claire scribbled on a notepad. Trap. Tomorrow then, I said, watching Claire nod. Just you and Lucas. And the FBI. Emma's voice cracked again. I'm sorry, Jenna, I really am. The line went dead. Claire was already dialing. Lucas, we need to talk. Now. My phone buzzed again. Mark. Did Emma call? Don't trust her. She'll say anything to save herself. Remember who knows you better, Jen. Who knows what you've done. He's playing us against each other, I said, showing them the message. Trying to make us destroy each other while he gets away. Then let's give him what he wants. Claire hung up her phone. Lucas is bringing the FBI to my office tonight. We're going to plan a little performance for tomorrow. What kind of performance? The kind where you and Emma tear each other apart publicly while we trace Mark's real location. She smiled grimly. He'll be watching somehow. Men like him always need to see the damage they've caused. Dad touched my shoulder. You don't have to do this, sweetheart. We can find another way. I thought of Mrs. Henderson, of the degree I never got to pursue, of all the dreams Mark had stolen while pretending to protect me from them. No, I said, picking up the red envelope from Claire's desk. This started with his performance. It's fitting it ends with mine. Claire nodded. The FBI will be here in an hour. Ready to become everything Mark thinks you are? I smoothed out the withdrawal slip inside the envelope, my signature stark against the paper. One last act of compliance that had started this whole unraveling. Ready to become everything he fears I can be. The FBI's surveillance van smelled like stale coffee and desperation. Agent Torres adjusted my wire while explaining the plan one last time, but my attention fixed on the cafe across the street where Emma sat waiting. Remember, Torres said, we need him to reveal his location. Keep her talking about Mexico. I nodded, watching Emma through the van's tinted windows. She looked smaller somehow, her designer clothes replaced by wrinkled travel wear, the perfect wife reduced to Mark's perfect victim. Just like me. He's watching, Claire said from her laptop. Mark just accessed the cafe's security feed, using Emma's old login. My hands trembled as I smoothed down my shirt. Good. The cafe door chimed as I entered. Emma's head snapped up, mascara smudged beneath red-rimmed eyes. The FBI had already swept her for weapons and wires. She was clean, desperate, perfect. You look terrible, I said, sliding into the booth. You would too if... She stopped, glancing around. Is anyone else coming? Just us. I placed the red envelope on the table. And whatever ghost of Mark is watching through those cameras. Her face paled. He's not. Save it. I pushed the envelope toward her. Show me the files. Emma's fingers twitched toward her bag. How do I know you won't just turn me in? Because I'm already ruined. I leaned forward, letting her see the rage I'd hidden for 15 years. He made sure of that the day I signed this withdrawal slip. She pulled out a thumb drive, then hesitated. He said you knew about everything. The fraud, the accounts, all of it. Said you were the mastermind. A laugh burst out, sharp as broken glass. And you believed him, the same man who promised to leave his wife, to start fresh with you in Mexico. He loved me. He loved what you could provide. I gestured to the thumb drive. Access, alibis, a fresh victim when I stopped being useful. The cafe door chimed again. Lucas walked in, right on schedule. FBI agents disguised as customers shifting slightly in their seats. Time's up, ladies. He approached our table, badge visible on his belt. Emma, the federal agents are ready for your statement. She clutched the thumb drive tighter. Wait, I need... My phone buzzed. Mark's message lit up the screen. You really think you can beat me at my own game, Jen? Check your email. I spread through my veins as I opened my inbox. There it was. Dozens of emails, spanning years, showing my apparent knowledge of every fraud, every scheme. All perfectly forged, all dated years back. He played us both, I whispered, showing Emma the screen. These emails, he must have been planning this for years. Her face crumpled. The thumb drive. It's not just about the fraud. There's more. What do you mean? Mrs. Henderson wasn't the only patient he stole from. She slid the drive across the table with trembling fingers. There were others, so many others. The cafe's security camera whirred, turning toward our table. Mark was watching, waiting for his masterpiece to unfold. Lucas reached for the drive, but I was faster. Plugging it into my phone, I opened the first file. Names, dates, account numbers, deaths, my patients, my vulnerable, trusting patients. All of them targeted, their final gifts and bequests redirected, their families left wondering why their loved ones' last wishes weren't honored. The room spun. Years of careful documentation spread before me, not just of fraud, but of calculated predation. Mark hadn't just stolen money, he'd stolen dignity from the dying. My phone buzzed again. Now you know everything. Run if you want. The evidence points to you, the devoted nurse, taking advantage of her patient's trust. Who would believe otherwise? Emma started crying, quiet, broken sobs. Lucas's hand found my shoulder, steadying me as the full weight of Mark's betrayal crashed down. He's won, I whispered, staring at the evidence of years of calculated destruction. He's actually won. The cafe door chimed one final time. Agent Torres walked in, face grim. We lost his signal, she said. He's gone. In the security camera's dark eye, I watched my reflection. The perfect wife, the dedicated nurse, now the perfect scapegoat for a man who'd spent 15 years preparing for this moment. The red envelope sat between Emma and me, a reminder of where it all started. One small act of compliance that had opened the door to hell. Mark was free, and I was left holding evidence of crimes I never knew I was committing. The burner phone Claire gave me buzzed at midnight. One message. Transferring funds now. Belize National Bank. Mark's fatal flaw was always his pride. He couldn't resist one final victory lap. Got him, Agent Torres said, her team tracking the transfer in real time. He's at the Marina Hotel in Belize City. I stared at the phone, remembering every patient whose trust Mark had betrayed through me. How long until local authorities can... Wait. Claire's voice cut through the surveillance van. He's calling. My hands shook as I answered. Hello, Mark. I have to admit you surprised me. His voice carried that familiar smugness. Using Emma was clever, almost as clever as my contingency plans. You mean the forged emails? The fake paper trail? He laughed. Oh, sweetheart, those were just insurance. I'm talking about the second thumb drive, the one Emma doesn't know about. My blood ran cold. In the van, agents scrambled to track his location. What drive? The one I left with your father's lawyer yesterday, containing evidence of your involvement in a decade of patient exploitation. His voice hardened. Unless what? Unless you convince the FBI to back off. Tell them Emma acted alone. I'll destroy the evidence. You keep your nursing license, everyone wins. Claire was already shaking her head, mouthing stalling. We needed 3 more minutes to triangulate his position. You really think I care about my license now? No, he said softly. But you care about your father's reputation. My heart stopped. What? Did you really think I'd let Henry keep his pension after he helped you investigate me? One anonymous tip about a teacher who covered up student abuse 30 years ago. You're bluffing. But my voice cracked. Check tomorrow's paper. The story's already filed. Keys clicked in the background. You have 1 hour to call off the FBI. Otherwise what, Mark? The words burst out, years of rage behind them. You'll destroy another life? Add 1 more victim to your list? Silence stretched between us. In the van, Agent Torres held up 1 finger. 1 minute more. You know what your problem is, Jen? His voice turned contemplative. You never understood the game. While you were playing nurse, building your little house of cards with Claire and Daddy, I was playing chess. No. I gripped the phone tighter. My problem was believing you ever loved anything except power. Power? He laughed again. Power is watching you scramble to save your father's reputation. Power is knowing you'll fold, just like you always do. Because deep down, you're still that insecure nurse who needed me to make her decisions. 30 seconds, Torres whispered. I thought of the red envelope, of Mrs. Henderson, of every patient who trusted me, while Mark turned their faith into profit. You're right about one thing, I said. I did need you to make my decisions. Until I didn't. What does that mean? It means check your accounts, Mark, all of them, now. Keyboard clicks, then silence. When he spoke again, his voice shook. What did you do? I learned to play chess. I nodded to Claire, who pressed enter on her laptop. Every account you opened in my name, I just emptied them. All that stolen money, it's being returned to my patients' families. With interest. That's impossible. The passwords were all variations of my name. Because your fatal flaw, Mark. It wasn't pride. It was underestimating me. Got him, Torres shouted. Local police moving in. Through the phone, I heard pounding on his door. Mark's breathing turned ragged. You really think this changes anything? I still have the evidence. You mean this? Dad's voice came through on the conference line. Your little package arrived right on schedule. Currently sitting with the FBI's forensics team. Mark's composure finally cracked. How? Because you were right. I did learn from you. I took a deep breath. I learned to plan ahead, to keep evidence, to always have a contingency. The sound of splintering wood came through the line, followed by shouts in Spanish. Goodbye, Mark. I ended the call as chaos erupted on his end. In the sudden silence of the van, Claire reached for my hand. You okay? I looked at the red envelope, now filled with evidence of Mark's crimes instead of my compliance. No, I said honestly, but I will be. The courthouse steps felt colder than they should in spring. I watched Mark being led away in handcuffs, his designer suit wrinkled from weeks in custody. He didn't look back. 15 years, Claire said beside me, closing her briefcase, plus full restitution to the victims' families. The red envelope sat in my purse, now filled with the judge's final order instead of Mark's demands, a reminder of how everything had started and ended. Mrs. Thompson, I turned to find Mrs. Henderson's daughter, Sarah, clutching a familiar leather-bound notebook. Your mother's journal. She wrote about you, Sarah said, offering me the book. Every day during her treatment, she knew something was wrong with the inheritance, but she couldn't prove it. My hands trembled as I took the journal. I'm so sorry I didn't see. No. Sarah touched my arm. You gave her dignity in her final months. That's what mattered to her. As she walked away, Emma emerged from the courthouse, flanked by her lawyer. Her immunity deal had saved her from prison, but her testimony had sealed Mark's fate. Our eyes met briefly before she hurried past, another victim of Mark's games trying to rebuild. Dad waited by his truck, looking more relaxed than he had in months. The false allegations against him had crumbled under scrutiny, just another of Mark's desperate plays. Ready to go home? He asked. Home. Not the designer house Mark had insisted we needed, but my childhood bedroom, temporarily reclaimed while I figured out what came next. Almost. I turned to Claire. There's something I need to do first. The hospital corridor felt different now. My colleague smiled, no longer whispering about the nurse whose husband had stolen from dying patients. I stopped at the oncology ward's nurse station, where a stack of applications waited. Graduate school? Claire asked, reading over my shoulder. Mrs. Henderson's original inheritance amount. I signed the application. Exactly enough for a nurse practitioner program. Fitting, she said, using his restitution money to become what he tried to prevent. My pager buzzed. A patient needed help. Some things hadn't changed. Go, Claire said. I'll file these. In room 415, an elderly man struggled with his water glass. I helped him drink, adjusted his pillows, performed the small acts of dignity that Mark had never understood. You're good at this, the patient said. Must be rewarding, helping people. I thought of Mrs. Henderson's journal, of all the patients who'd trusted me while Mark exploited that trust, of how revenge had felt hollow compared to this moment of simple human connection. It is, I said, more than I remembered. My phone buzzed with a text from the FBI. Mark's overseas accounts had been found. More victims, more restitution due. The work wasn't over. But as I walked back to the nurse's station, I passed the wall of thank you cards from recovered patients. Among them hung a new one from Sarah Henderson. Thank you for fighting for her dignity. Claire waited with the completed applications and a small smile. Ready? I touched Mrs. Henderson's journal in my pocket, thinking of all the stories it contained, of how revenge had started this journey, but something else had finished it. Almost, I said, reaching for my badge. The name Thompson stared back at me, another choice Mark had made for me. I pulled out a form I'd been carrying for weeks. One last thing to reclaim. Claire's smile widened as I signed my maiden name, Jenna Collins, watching the ink dry on the page. Now I'm ready. The red envelope still sat in my purse, a reminder of how easy it is to lose yourself in small compromises. But as we walked out of the hospital, I felt its weight differently. Not as a burden of what I'd lost, but as a lesson in what I'd found. Some people might call it justice, or karma, or revenge. But standing there, holding my graduate school application and Mrs. Henderson's journal, I finally understood what it really was. Freedom, not from Mark or his schemes, or even the pain he'd caused, but from the person I'd become while trying to be his perfect wife. And that was worth more than any revenge.